Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. I really appreciate you joining us today. This is going to be Breaking the Bias in Sports Journalism session, as Rachel mentioned. So I wanted to just let you know that I drew inspiration for this webinar from the theme for International Women's Day last month, which was hashtag break the bias, right? So with the theme, hello, Sylvia. With the theme of hashtag break the bias, they asked everyone to imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive, and a world where difference is valued and separated. And I think we can all agree that would be fantastic if we can imagine that. So for this session, we're focusing on just that, breaking the bias in sports journalism. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Tracey Savell Reavis, and I am a veteran sports journalist. I got my start working in Sports Illustrated magazine. I also was a staff writer for the National Basketball Association. I wrote for CBS Sports covering the Sunday football show. I worked for the NFL Europe for the Barcelona Dragons when I lived in Europe for 5 years. I worked for Callaway Golf in a publishing venture that they had for a while. And I also worked on for the US Olympic Committee on the Pan Am Games. I'm currently looking for an agent to pitch my second book, just putting that out there. I have a sports communications consulting firm, which is the Savell Group. And I also publish The Club, which is my monthly newsletter that does cover the US men's and women's national team. I will put a link in that so you can sign up for that as well. Yes, great, thank you, fantastic. Okay, I am joined today by a very impressive panelists. Both are pioneers in sports journalism, and they have generously lended their voices today to discuss what can be done about breaking the bias in sports journalism. So ladies, please introduce yourself, and then we will later on in the session get to know more about your careers. Sylvia?
Okay, I'm first. Hi, everybody. I'm Sylvia Bollock, she, her, hers pronouns. I work in higher education, actually, as a full-time job, we'll call it that. And I currently do, or I guess my contribution to sports journalism is I am one half of the podcast Shea FC, which we cover women's soccer, particularly with the lens on Black players in the sport. As we know, particularly in the United States, but also abroad, there is an underrepresentation of their story, style of play, things of that nature. And I don't know, my predilection is always to help and to serve. And so I think even in this space, as a journalist still working on owning that title, and just having access into this space pretty quickly, that's sort of been the focus, is to serve and to help elevate those stories and explain the game, right? Explain the game to what we call the culture, who already knows and loves the game, but I think there's a lack of access and a lack of connect there in the States. And so, you know, telling those stories, analyzing those games, those players, and really being able to carry that forward ties into the work that I do with helping young adults as well. So I don't know, that's a little bit about me.
Perfect, perfect. And we're going to talk some more about underrepresentation later as well. Ellen.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And first, I do just want to apologize. There's a little bit of construction going on in the unit below me, so apologies there. But yeah, my name's Ellen. I am one of the co-founders and head of content for The Gist. The Gist is a digital sports media startup that's all about leveling the playing field in sports and making sports more inclusive, fun, and accessible to everyone. We have a free 4 times weekly sports newsletter that gives you the gist of what's up in the sports world, both on men's and women's sports, covering men's and women's sports equally. And all of our journalists are women. Our entire team is women founded as well as women operated. We have a twice weekly podcast called The Gist of It. And we also have daily social media that you can follow us at The Gist USA, as well as at The Gist Sports on TikTok. So I'm really excited to be on the panel today, especially with Sylvia and Tracey, with all of your experience, especially in the soccer side of things. We cover a broad range of sports, from the NFL to the WNBA, team, and we are both in Canada as well as in the US. So definitely a Canadian women's national team fan over here. So shout out to our Canadian team always and our recent gold medal. So I have to say that, but very excited to learn and to chat today, especially from my kind of like entrepreneurial journey, kind of a different way to get into journalism and into sports, and excited to learn a lot from you too, Sylvia.
Perfect. Thank you both. So before we get started, I wanted to give you some facts and figures, sort of the status of the industry. So the first, as many of you know, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX this year. And I think we can all acknowledge that there's been a lot of progress made in participation in sports for women on the field, in management, and in sports journalism. But we do have a ways to go. These figures may surprise you, may not. Let's just see. So the first one is 95%. Okay, so this is a study last year found that 95% of total television coverage, including highlights on ESPN Sports Center, focused on men's sports in 2019. 95% of coverage was on men's sports. Okay, the next one is a grade F, F for failure. This was sports desks at 75 of the nation's newspapers and online news sites earned a 6th consecutive grade of F for lack of gender equity hiring practices. F as in failure. And the last one is 10%. This is, I don't know if any followed college basketball. There was a commercial during March Madness that ran. I think it was a car commercial, and there was nothing on the screen, but in the background, you could hear a women's sports event. It was, I think, a volleyball game or a basketball game. And across the screen came the words, 40% of athletes are women, but women get less than 10% of the media coverage. So we do have some successes, even though those numbers are not fantastic. There's data, there are success stories, and we do have breakthroughs, and obviously you both on the panel are examples of that. So let's start with Ellen. Can you tell us a little bit more about your career and what you were doing to start, why you got into sports and why you wanted to start The Gist?
Sure. Yeah, so I have been a sports fan my entire life, grew up playing sports, mostly competitive soccer, something that really, I would say, changed my life for the better, and can't imagine my life without sports and without play as well. I ended up actually going to school for my undergrad for business, and somehow ended up working in financial services downtown Toronto, even though probably always wanted to do sports. I definitely the rhetoric of there's only a certain amount of space in the room for women. You have to work some really horrible hours. The pay is not great. And what if you went on the business side and then potentially make your way back into sports, which, you know, when you're young and impressionable, you're definitely listening to that type of advice from folks in the industry and elsewhere. So ended up getting into business. And it was actually there where my two co-founders, JC Roslin and I, came up with the idea for The Gist, and that we really saw that sports are this social currency in society today, and that they have this really unique ability to unite people regardless of age, race, religion, gender, who they're voting for, what their party is. But at the same time, sports really did feel like a place where women were left out of the conversation. Whether they were avid sports fans, they were constantly being asked to prove their fandom. If they were new to sports, it was like, oh, you don't need to be a part of this conversation. And it just kind of felt like the sports community was gatekept. And that really hurt us, I guess, in a way, because if anything, sports are that, again, that one thing that really unite people and are so special, and that can bring people together no matter what. And so we thought, okay, how can we make this more accessible and fun to everyone? And that's how we really came up with the idea of being a digitally forward company that's all about equal coverage, that has 100% women on the team to come at things with a more inclusive voice and perspective, and that we're going to be speaking to an audience in a really different way than the traditional sports media, what you see at, you know, ESPN, Fox Sports, NBC News, what have you, from this authority place. We really wanted it to be actually listening to our audience and creating content that was from the ground up. We had a soft launch in 2017, and we're working as a side hustle off of, still working in financial services, and then went full-time in 2018 and launched across North America in 2019. Excellent timing before the pandemic, of course. But now I'm really, really proud of our team and how we've grown. We have over 25 women on our team now and are currently hiring for many full-time and part-time roles. So definitely check us out. And we have over 750,000 gisters in our community with over 500,000 subscribers on our newsletter. We have a sports news newsletter, but we also launched a sports business newsletter this year that fully focuses on the women's side of sports business, because Tracey, those numbers that you were talking about at the beginning, they're even worse for when you look at the back end of what's happening in women's sports. So no one's, talking about as much as they should about all of the investments that Serena Williams is making. No one's talking about the branded partnerships that people are signing. There's not enough talk about NIL and the women's sports space. So we're also covering those really closely on the women's sports business side of things. So a little bit of a different way into sports, starting on the business side and then creating the gist and learning and surrounding ourselves with smarter people and more experienced people than us. But that's kind of been the story so far.
Yeah, that's great. I'm definitely going to ask you to talk more a little bit later about the about addressing the negative talk that sometimes women are sort of given. You don't really want to do this to keep us away. And also the other part that you mentioned about what women are covering, making sure that the women's issues are being covered. And sometimes that is missed. And you're talking about the business end of women involved in business. And sometimes that isn't covered as well. So we'll come back to that. Sylvia, can you tell us a little bit also about what you're doing and how you got started?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? We're good?
Yes.
Okay. So like Ellen, I grew up loving sports. I'm one of two daughters. My sister is not necessarily a sports person. So my dad and I watched sports, like music and sports were our thing. It's how we bonded. And I would just take it all in. I'd sit in front of the TV. He'd explain to me what was going on. And always empowering. I think it's really great when you have men like that behind you. My father always has been that man. But just wanted to dabble in a little bit of everything. And for me, it was this far off dream that like I could see somebody doing it, but it wasn't necessarily something I thought I'd do when I grew up, kid's dream, but I saw the Robin Roberts, the Hannah Storms, that I was like, I'd like to do something like that. And as you get older, things leave your mind, right? Had no intention of actually following through with it. But, became really enthralled in sports. I always point to the summer of '99 for people. This is both Women's World Cup. It's also when Serena Williams won her first championship. So sort of this infinite possibility of, women in sports can kind of go anywhere, do anything, particularly seeing a young Black woman do it. And so have always been an avid watcher, played softball through high school and into college for club. It's been an escape for me. I, obviously gone into higher education, gone into service, and then the pandemic hit and everything shut down and there were no sports. And I found myself much sadder than I thought. Obviously, everything that we did needed to be done, but just how much it had mattered to my life and how much of an imprint it had made. And I found myself going back and rewatching a lot of matches because there wasn't anything else to do really in terms of sports. And it was the first time I'd had a moment to pause and sort of realize like, oh yeah, I could sit down and do this, like analyze the sport, break it down, explain it to people. This is why I find joy in the game, that kind of thing. And I connected online because we were all online with my future podcast partner, Sky. And I think for us, it was seeing, so us in particular, our lens is obviously focusing on Black women in soccer and sort of how hard the road was for them, even when they were talented, right? Even when they were marketable, even when it was all of these things that check a box if they weren't Black, and sort of the discrepancies there, and sort of got together and had an idea for a show, right? Like that old View adage, but sort of stuck with it and started writing our stuff out and talking and conversing. And then again, I think for us in an organic way, right, we were able to connect with other people. Like, again, we say the culture first, but, Black culture in soccer and online, and really build this network. And it is ourselves, it is other Black women, it's Black men as well. And just really being able to get together organically and create this larger thing and be able to tell these stories and We launched the pod a little over a year ago. We just celebrated our birthday, actually. And we were just like, hey, we want to talk and just say what we're seeing, right? And explain the game the best way we know how, while being true to who we were, our life experiences. And like we said, elevating stories, talking about players we like to see, talking about players we looked up to growing up. Like, I want to talk about Angela Euclid and Shannon Box and Brianna Scurry and all of these other people. So yeah, I think we went with it kind of fly by night. Like, yeah, we kind of knew what we were doing, kind of not. But when you're a trailblazing pioneer, I like that word. My godmother calls me that. It's very funny. But just sort of going with it and realizing along the way that other people felt the same, and we were getting listeners and we were connecting with an audience. And I think being able to connect with the fans, particularly WOSO, is a pretty, online at least, is a pretty small community. So just being able to connect and get that feedback and the things people came to us with, right? And a responsibility we felt as that continued to happen and people reached out. And it was players, it was fans, it was front office, it was in staff, it was all of these people. And then we felt a responsibility, not that we didn't have it before, but really felt a responsibility to be, to tell these stories in the most honest way possible, to give people that platform. And then what does it look like to expand? What does it look like to give access to people? It's not a lack of fans that look like us or people interested in the sport that look like us. But it's not a lack of talent, it's a lack of access is our thing, and the game is for everybody. And so what does that really mean in action? What do we do? How are we presenting a podcast, a business, a platform for people going forward?
Perfect. You both touched on sort of like there was a need for something, you created something, you didn't necessarily go into a traditional route to work for Sports Illustrated or ESPN. You created something, you found a need for it, and you created something. And that might lead to some sort of like what adversities that you kind of have faced, not just in that channel, but in your sort of career. And Ellen, you touched on it a little bit about how people said, oh, you don't want to go this way. There's long hours, there's weekends. I mean, I remember 1,000 years ago when I worked as an intern for the New York Knicks in Madison Square Garden, and people said, on weekends, I said, okay, well, that's when sports is. So yeah, that's okay. I get it. It's fine. But go ahead. Any other obstacles?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like, well, that's my passion. I could totally work it. Like, I was up last night till like 1 a.m. So, you know what I mean? Even it's always going to be something you're choosing it. You know what I mean? People are choosing this occupation or opportunity to be able to follow sports, and you can just work some wacky hours in order to follow your passion. So definitely, again, looking back would not be something that would deter me. But I feel like at that time, maybe I was experiencing a little bit of FOMO or something like that, not being able to see my friends or do the traditional kind of classic things. But anyway, I feel like the biggest thing with the GIST, Tracey, was honestly at the beginning, like, we didn't have funding, we didn't have money, and we were trying to start a business that we wanted to be sustainable. We saw so much opportunity and potential with the GIST. And at the beginning, we were able to put in a couple $1,000s here and there of what JC, mine, and Rosalind's paychecks were. And Toronto was an expensive city, so it was basically us like on a really tight budget and putting all of our disposable income into the GIST. And we were fortunate enough to be selected into a really great incubator program in Toronto, but also with the Facebook journalism project, which was just paramount to us actually quitting our full-time jobs and launching the GIST and being able to do it full time, because they were able to provide us with non-dilutive funding, access to a free office, access to mentorship, as well as some Facebook ads and credits. And we had just kind of saved up some money where we didn't pay ourselves for about 1.5 years, 2 years before we could really afford to be doing something like that. And we were really lucky that we had like those financial services jobs to rely on. But where I'm kind of going is that when we were raising our initial round, which is friends, family, we were also kind of being connected with VCs in the space and higher level angel networks and things like that. And it comes a lot back to who controls money. And at the end of the day, it is a lot of middle-aged or older white cis men. And do they see an issue with the sports media industry right now? No. Right. Do they understand where we're all coming from in terms of not feeling like the sports media industry or the community is not for us because it's not being written or spoken to us in a way that's actually talking about the stories that we care about? no, they don't necessarily get that. And so we went through a really kind of different route, I would say, in raising money. And we were lucky enough, again, we raised a friends, family, and angels round. We found some folks who believed in us, but a little bit of the non-traditional way. We were still ended up doing the Techstars route on NBC. We moved on to Philadelphia, launched the US down there, and that was amazing. They really wanted to push you into that DC space. We're kind of looking at it like this just doesn't feel to just feel like we're going to place because these folks understand our audience and like.
Ellen, I think we're getting a little bit of a feedback, and we're not quite hearing you. I don't know if it was me or not, or if everyone, but I couldn't quite make out some of what you were saying. But I know that you're talking about some of the challenges that you have for raising money. Mm-hmm.
Yes, can you hear me now?
It's like every other word. Is it happening for you, Sylvia, too? Yes, every other word is kind of like not coming in.
Okay, let me try something here.
Okay, but can I ask
Sylvia?
Yeah, we can't quite. Yeah, let's see, Sylvia. Can you let's talk about a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced as a sports journalist, or what you think, how you overcame that, and certainly starting your own thing is admirable, right?
Yes, maybe a little. Maybe a
I
little off. I don't know.
I mean, in the way of sort of like not asking for permission.
Yeah. So, well, I'm at the point in my life, right? I'm 37 years old, where it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. There was a need, right? And it's one of those, one of the models of Black women, without being profane, is, screw it, I'll do it, right? Like, I think we saw an opportunity, we went there, and we're still figuring it out on the go. Like, I don't want people to look from the outside in and think, we have it together. We don't, right? Like, we really just said, okay, we know this is something we need to do. We'll figure it out as we go along. We've poured our own money into this so far, right? We're just getting to the point where we can start to think of those funding apparatuses, and part of becoming a part of the 2 Cents family, which has been an incredible thing for us. And they've been incredibly supportive, is to be able to, connect our networks and open up access for everybody involved, right? And it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And I couldn't ask for a better support system. And that's come about because we opened our mouths and decided to just jump in feet first and start the show. And our, like I said, our biggest supporter is a Black man, and sort of just, he saw it before we saw it, or saw it while we saw it, and, helped talk us through it. And honestly, one of my biggest obstacles, I think Sky would disagree, she's a lot more confident in these things, is the belief that I am a journalist. I can be in this space. I know Ellen spoke earlier about the gatekeeping nature of this, and it can be, and again, I love women's soccer, but in particular, it can be very gatekeepy, right? Or there's one type of media, right? If you don't write, you aren't a journalist, or you're not contributing. And that's simply not true, because it's 2022 and the world has changed, right? It's more than one way to do this. There's more than one way to get your foot in the door. And at the end of the day, I think for me, it's being motivated by something, I wouldn't say bigger, but something outside of self, right? Again, we're trying to follow the lead, right? We're trying to follow the lead of the Black Women's Players Collective. We're trying to follow the lead of, other pods, other businesses, other people in these spaces.
You're also not just setting the lead, you're also setting an example. You're not just following the lead, you are leading by setting.
Yes, there are young, and there are,
representation matters.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, oh, it's just for young people. It's not, but there are definitely younger people, younger Black people, particularly young Black queer people looking at us, right? And, asking questions and thinking, okay, maybe this is something we can do. And we really want to encourage that. And make sure we're opening a space, right? Each one reach one, each one teach one, right? Exactly. But really bringing people with you. That's part of our ethos. That's part of our culture, our community, how we were raised, right? You bring your people with you. And so I think just trying to show people this can exist, and it can exist in this way, and we can hold on to our integrity as much as possible while we build this thing, and while we tell these stories that need to be told. Yes. And with everything else going on, again, particularly in the women's soccer sphere in America, but you see it all over the world, right? In different leagues, and what's going on, the harm that's been done, the need to speak out and really say, this is what's been happening. And in spite of all of that, you have these amazing players making these amazing plays day in, day out, and giving so much of themselves for our entertainment. and for their livelihood. And so the least we can do.
Representation matters, perseverance matters. That's definitely.
Absolutely.
We're running a little bit we're almost close to our time, but I want to make sure we just reinforce that, to give some career tips for folks. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us, because we'll put all our information in the chat box. But just that perseverance is important. Stay with it, and build a community, networking. Rachel mentioned earlier that I'm starting Project Keep Kicking, which is a mentoring program. If you want to reach out to me, we all need to, we can't do it by ourselves. You absolutely should surround yourselves. That's my one big career tip advice. You should absolutely surround yourselves, build a community, build relationships. It's all about networking, and you don't have to do it alone. Do you want to add anything to that, Ellen? Again, in terms of, sorry about your audio stuff earlier, but any other tips for just persevering and how to make it happen? Oh, now you're on mute, sorry. You're on mute. And we can't hear you. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening, Ellen. But again, if anyone has any questions for us, we put together a resources document with all the information that we talked about today, and some tips and some more resources. And I'll make sure that everyone who's participating gets a copy of that PDF. It also has our contact information. Any other last words that if anyone has any questions and they want to ask anything, please reach out to us. Yes. And if we can't get Ellen on, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure. You're on mute. We can't hear you. But I do want to thank Women in Soccer for asking us to do this panel. And I definitely want to thank our panelists for participating. And I hope you all got some tips and some information. The most important thing, as we said, is to persevere. If it's what you want to do, it is possible. Our panelists started their own things. You definitely can do it. You don't have to follow the traditional working for ESPN or Sports Illustrated, so to speak. And if there's any questions, please reach out to us.